Welcome to the Inappropriate Growth Podcast. Today, we are excited to have Allie Murphy as our guest. Allie is the owner of Law Office Success and has a proven track record of helping small law firms grow and scale. With her expertise in business and market development strategy, Allie has a deep understanding of the legal industry and how to grow a law firm in a local market. She is known for developing and implementing marketing and business development strategies that help law firms increase their revenue and reach new clients. Allie is a creative thinker and a problem solver, always looking for innovative ways to help law firm owners grow their businesses. Her passion for helping law firms succeed and her commitment to providing the highest level of service make her a standout in the field. Join us as we dive into Allie's journey, her business successes, and the challenges she's overcome. Join us as we get inappropriate. Welcome to this episode of the Inappropriate Growth Podcast. I'm Paul Angelle, your host. Today, I'm really excited. I've got Allie Murphy as my guest. Full disclosure to everyone in the audience, Allie and I have worked together on multiple projects. In fact, most of my biggest successes have probably involved Allie in some small way. And our collaborating is likely to continue and increase in the future. That said, I want to get started, but before that, so I don't have to do it, Allie, why don't you tell everyone where you are and how you got there?
So it's been an interesting road. So I grew up in retail and heavy sales and outside sales, and that's sort of all I've ever done my entire life is business development, marketing, and so in 2019 I found myself jobless, and I was terminated from my last position 40 days before my little boy was due. And so it was sort of like zero failure. So what I did is I started taking meetings and having coffees and the same things that I tell my clients to do, and shaking trees. And so I had I had a friend that was involved in the law firm industry, and he helped with operations and management. And he'd said that a lot of the lawyers that he works with, they don't necessarily have the best skills and ideas to go market and develop their law firms. And so he made a couple introductions, and I met a law firm out in Newport Beach, and they hired me. And it was perfect timing because it was 2 hours before my little guy was due. So I was in the delivery room and closed my first client. And a few weeks later, I landed another client, and one turned into two turned into four. And somewhere along the way, Law Office Success was born. And it's been 5 years and change now. And what's really cool is a lot of the firms I've worked with, I've helped them double, triple their growth, and it's sustainable because I'm not the kind of strategist or outside help that comes in where, a lot of people, they go, you should, where like me and my team, we roll up our sleeves and we dig into the operations and really become part of the law firm week in and week out to help move them forward. So at a point where we are finished with our, engagement, they're still able to take what we've done and continue to implement it to grow.
That's where I kind of want to get started. I want to start with how you get stuff done. And I've heard you talk about a dollar process.
Everyone has to have their standard processes, right? Their marketing piece. I call it the dollar process. It stands for discover, learn, research, and respond, which means that when I have a discovery call, I like to listen, ask a lot of questions. And then typically what I'll do is I will schedule a second call and dive further into those questions and the responses I've got. And then I'll go off and do my research and then come back with a custom scope for my clients. And then I teach them to do this same thing on their intake to really help maximize getting all the client information into their CRMs.
I know a big part of what you do, I know this because it's a big part of what I do, revolves around accountability. And
Right.
I tend to hold owners accountable to strategic plans based on goals, and use that to give them the motivation to do those tactical tasks or whatever to grow their business. Where are you pushing hard for accountability?
Well, it starts at the top, right? So you have a lot of law firms that got very comfortable over COVID becoming remote law firms. And then what happens is the boss gets very comfortable being remote, but the team has to go into the office. So really it's the accountability. There's a lot to be said for the old school of walking around the office, knocking on the doors, having the one-on-ones, and if they're going to do a remote, they still have to have the one-on-one. So I created something called the Monday Morning Matters meetings for my clients. And so what I do is I get my law firm clients to start running their firm as a sales oriented law firm, where the legal part of it is production, sales is first. And so what we do is we flip flop the firm where we're really focused on leads, driving leads and converting leads. And so as a byproduct, once you become a sales first law firm, you'll notice that the production just happens to happen because you're in the legal industry and that's what you do is law.
And you deal with vendors too. That
Yes.
was when I first noticed the marketing agencies, the software, the social media, the different marketing, the elements within the marketing campaigns. Is that accountability there too, or is that where you take over?
Yeah, so my team and I will go in and we'll get once we engage with a law firm, we'll go in and we'll read all the agreements with all the vendors, and then we'll create audits, and then we'll benchmark those audits against the services being delivered. And then month in, month out, we will start holding the vendors accountable. And it's amazing how many vendors self-select during that process, where all of a sudden, the client becomes too difficult to deal with because they're asking the right questions and really starting to measure the right KPIs and deliverables. So it's amazing how many vendors typically try to under deliver because I mean, in their defense, I would be worried about scope creep too, especially from marketing. It's less for like standard SaaS products, but a lot of the agency style people, they tend to deliver either right on par or just under. And the moment that they get pushed, you'll see a lot of them digging their heels for scope creep. And really, the rubber meets the road, and to have the competitive edge of your people in your market, you really want to push especially your marketing and especially your marketing vendors, anyone doing content or outreach, because if you make those one little tweak, that's where the rubber meets the road and the magic happens. And you'll see something happen and your competitors start scratching their head going, how are they doing that?
When you talk about maximizing a practice area, for example, first kind of explain that concept, and I think you call it spawning.
A lot of times, let's say I'm trying to think of a really good practice area. So like with family law seems to be very cut and dry, but it's not. I really like to break up the practice of family law between divorce and family. Divorce meaning two adults that are married that are splitting up, and family law meaning that it's typically two adults that are splitting up, and then there's children involved, unless the parents had never gotten together to begin with. And once you start really breaking down the nuances of every single subcategory within the practice areas, just like custody, there's parenting time, there's grandparenting time, there could be other people involved. And once you really start dialing that in, all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 opportunities to drive new revenue to your law firm that no one's ever considered before. And then on top of that, your intake team really understands how to ask the right questions to help you find those last little nickels and dimes to be able to run your law firm on. And then spawning. So spawning is an interesting concept. It's something I stole from the big enterprise corporations, and essentially it's growing horizontally and vertically. So if you're in family law, it could be partnering with an estate trust law firm, or doing estate and trust yourself, because a real estate law firm, because when you get divorced, the last thing you want to do is have someone deciding whether or not, you're as your personal representative that is now your ex spouse, and deciding if they're going to pull the plug. And the same could be for real estate, where, if one spouse gets the house and the other one doesn't, all of a sudden the house needs to be retitled, insurance needs to be updated. Those are all extra services that law firms could either offer or partner with strategic partners, either into a rev share if it's legal. And if not, they become really great referral partners. So you could go even greater, where you're all of a sudden you're real estate law firm and you're starting a title company. But that's another podcast for us to talk about.
I think sometimes I have an inappropriate relationship with KPIs, and I
Yeah.
know you're big and you're high on KPIs as well. I'm curious, how do you establish that? Like, how do you get the KPIs identified, understood, communicated, and then accomplished or tracked? Or how do you measure that?
What I call it, like the standard law firm math, where leads to calls to sets appointments, showed appointments, and then, convert, non-convert, and then taking the non-converted people and how do we get them to come back and either become a referral source or a client, because they're not going to hire you. You want them to at least know about you. One of the things that I like to look at that it's interesting, most of the people in similar job capacities or businesses like myself, is I really like to study the total available market. So how many people are getting divorced, how many crimes are being committed, the elderly population, real estate transactions. If you go into calls, so percentage of new calls per month versus repeat calls versus average time of calls, demographics, age, gender, religion, jobs, education. A lot of times marketing is just marketing. Like, this is what everybody else does. Let's do PPC. But if you really dial in the attributions and then take those attributions, apply them to the marketplace, and then start measuring for the inbound leads, you can really get a much better idea of what's going on in your firm, what's working, and then how to repeat that and go back out in the marketplace to be able to grow your firm or grow another practice area. To go back to what we talked about with, like, the spawning idea.
Every market I've been to looks like a snowflake. They're all exactly the same, but they're absolutely different.
Well, I like to say that, people go, "Are you a lawyer?" when I tell them what I do, and I'm like, "No, I'm in sales and marketing and business development." And people do business with people. And the moment you start looking and listening and responding to the market, you're going to be able to find opportunity. It doesn't matter if you're selling legal, accounting services, or a coffee mug. It's all exactly the same.
I know we've both had to deal with imposter syndrome in our businesses and our fronts and with our clients, but how do you help owners get past that? Because I know that that's a big mindset deal and that's a big problem, and that can derail a whole bunch of well-intended plans.
Yeah, we all wake up with imposter syndrome, even when we don't. And a lot of times I come into law firms and they're 5, 6, 10 years old, and the lawyer woke up one morning and said, "I'm tired of working for the machine and I'm going to go do my own thing." And then 5 years later, they have $100,000 a month payroll or $50,000 a month payroll, and they have rent, and they have overhead, and they have a credit line, and they have a bunch of vendors, and they're trying to figure out, what do I do? And I call it the accidental entrepreneur syndrome, right? They just wake up one morning and it's immediate anxiety, and so I think we all have that, right? If we've ever worked for ourselves, or a lot of times if we're just so dependent on that one job and we've been there forever, you get that imposter syndrome. And so it's really sort of going and helping the lawyer understand the meat of their business, like, the financials, the operations. I like to say that you can't build a house from the roof down. You got to start with a good foundation. And even if you're rebuilding the foundation in the beginning, in the middle of the middle of the lifespan of the business, it's amazing how much more substantial that business becomes and how much more defensible it becomes in the marketplace as well. So yeah, I mean, on my notes here, I call it the OIDF, which is be organized, be intentional, be deliberate, and have good follow up. It's hard to have a it's hard to be able to move forward when you're not delegating. And too many people put it on their shoulders and they try to shoulder their entire business and I can do it better, and at the end of the day, you have to delegate and you have to trust your team, and no one's going to be able to do it 100%. They can do it 85, 90%. But as long as they're getting to that 85 and 90%, they're doing it better than the other firm, 2 blocks away. And if you can manage people for the expectations and not the journey, you're going to win every time. And that's how you're going to scale. And to bring it back to imposter syndrome, once you have all that fixed, you wake up in the morning and go, like, this is my marketing person and they're really great at that. And this is my intake person and I know they have my back. And when you need that extra little bit of money to make sure that you're not to push that failure, the failure back here, to push that down, that you have the levers to go pull.
I find that one of the best cures for imposter syndrome is to stop comparing yourself to other people. Nothing good ever comes of it. You either get a false sense of how good you are or a terrible false sense of how bad you are. I've been in situations where it's like, okay, it's day 50. They still think I'm one of them. Or I really feel like everybody's figured this out and I have no idea what's going on. But
right.
If I'm an accidental entrepreneur, that resonates. I see that all the time.
I think every entrepreneur is a fake it till you make it at some point, because at some point if you don't outrun the faking, you're gonna get sussed out, and then you're not gonna get any more intros or referrals, or you're gonna get a bad reputation. And with today's world, the media and Google business and everything else, it's really, really easy to get a bad reputation very quickly.
I found in many cases, and this is early on in the process, especially at law firms, calendar management, in my experience, is probably one of the most transformative things an owner can do as far as delegating a chore or an action. How do you attack problems that you find with the calendar for your clients?
So I have a saying that either you manage your calendar or somebody else does. And it's sort of like being a business person, right? Is, you manage or you control your destiny or somebody else does. And that's typically why we become entrepreneurs, is to try to grow and become, control our destiny and our finish line. But to that point, what I was going to say is block calendaring, right? But the other is, like, I set my calendar, I call it like the perfect day. I don't get to do it every single day, but 3 days a week, I have my calendar set in a block manner and I control what goes on. And when you're running a bigger business, it's harder to do, but you can still, control your calendar. You can't let your team go, oh, this is set for like, health and wellness or deep work. And they're like, well, we need to put this consult there. You really have to control those, especially like Calendly and Acuity and all these scheduling tools. You really have to be mindful of using the product to the max, but blocking out your time to be defensible of it. A couple of like my sayings are, what does a perfect day, week, and month look like? Work in your business, but also take the time to work on your business, which is what I do with my clients, where every single week, we take an hour or more and we work on the business, and it really pulls them up to look at all 30,000 feet. It's the same thing that you've done. Work on building meaningful connections. It's lonely at the top. Too many people become an executive and they think that their employees are their friends, and they're not. Your employees are not your friends. They are employees. They show up every day with a purpose, and that purpose is to help you build your business. You got to have a couple of different networks. You got to have your friend network. You got to have like your old school network. You got to have your professional network of like similar colleagues where you can trade business. But there's a network that nobody else takes the time to build, and that's the where I want to go network. And having those people that are a little bigger, a little badder, a little bit better at what you've done, and they're the ones that are going to pull you up and go, okay, we've done this before, so you should try this, this, and this. And, we're all entrepreneurs, so we're going to do our own iteration. But eventually you get up to those people, and then you build that next group, and it's birds of feathers. You got to have that. It's really important. Take 10 to 15 minutes and just find something that brings you joy every day. Whether it's sitting outside and being in the sun and reading, or taking a walk, or sitting in your car for 10 minutes with the AC on and, listening to your favorite music and your eyes closed, not on the, little dopamine machine. It just makes your day so much better.
We talked about intake, turning those potential clients into clients. I've heard you say that's the lifeline, right? It doesn't matter how good you are at litigating if you don't have any clients to engage. But how strategic do you get when it comes to intake, like an intake process or intake training or intake consistency?
It's everything. I mean, intake is everything, right? Simple things like, are you answering your phone after hours, or is it going to voicemail? Do you have a phone system that we can measure what's going on with your phone system? Are you missing calls at night versus how many voicemails are being left? You hear that all the time. Oh, they'll just leave a voicemail. Well, you really start diving in, and all of a sudden there's 20 missed calls every night, and only 4 of them are leaving voicemails, and they're going down Google and they're calling, or pay per click, and they're calling the next firm. Is the person on? You've ever heard that if you ever want to be on the phone and sound happy, you need to smile. Does a person on the phone, do they smile? Do they have confidence? Are they well versed in your products? 90% of law is people calling about the worst things in their life, like a car accident, a motorcycle accident. I don't like my human anymore. Someone took my children. I have to file bankruptcy. I'm being sued by a creditor. I'm being accused of a crime, whether you're guilty or not. Like, there is a lot in the person, it's the person's job answering the phone to be empathetic. People want to be heard. You got to understand active listening. But then you go into the quantification of it, like having an intake system where it's not just an email that goes into an inbox for Susie, the paralegal, to then decide to enter as to whether or not they're going to follow it up, or how does that all work? Are they setting an appointment? Does it go into a proper contact form, right? Do those contact forms go into email, or do they go into the CRM, preferably the CRM, so they don't get lost? The moment you tighten up all those little pieces, you're taking the marketing dollars and the products and software they're already paying for, and now they're getting more for them, and they're not spending any more money. That's the best part about it.
Well, every converted, happy, paid client at one point was coming into that intake process, right? I mean, it just was. And whatever your numbers are, that's the beauty to me of being aware of what your numbers are. If you know that it takes 10 leads to get one client, if you know that, and whatever if a client is worth $1,000, I stink at math, so I always use really divide by 10 examples. But if it's $1,000 is your average client, and it takes 10 leads to get a client, to get them through that funnel or that gauntlet to the end, instead of all the leads are worthless except the one that finally buys, is the way a lot of people look at it, and it's focusing on that revenue. But instead, each one of those leads is worth 100. So it takes 10 leads to get $1,000 client. Well, if you think of each one of those leads as $100, that's a tangible, viable, valuable thing. I mean, I know rich people, none of them would step over $100 bill if they saw it on the ground.
Right.
$100 is something important. You wouldn't throw it away, but it's moving from that mindset of the leads are worthless. Clients are all that matters. Every client was a lead. Every client was a prospect. Every client was in that process. And when you're not very consistent, or what I've experienced, when you're not very consistent, you're not very thorough, and you don't have the people with a capacity for empathy, like you talked about client prevention team or whatever, not everybody has a capacity for empathy. Doesn't necessarily mean they can't be on the bus at the firm. They just probably shouldn't be part of intake. And intake is not the bottom. In some cases, it's the single most important job in the firm.
It's your number one touch. It's the first touch of the experience, right? So, I mean, if anyone's judging, it's how quickly they pick up the phone, how they sound on the phone, the questions they ask. One of the things that I work on with intake is that, we disqualify first, we pre-qualify second, then we qualify, and then what we do is we do a deep qualification. And that deep qualification is really during the consult as to whether or not the attorney wants to have that person as a client, because not every client, just because they have the ability to pay, is the right person. And it's a really nice position to be in your law firm when you can pick and choose your clients as well. I'd like to say that, leads go from hot to warm to lukewarm to cold and forgotten. Between measuring your intake and keeping track of every single lead, it's amazing how much money people leave on the table. I mean, just again, it's tripping over the $100, just bye, see ya, light it on fire.
Well, and you said it, you alluded to it earlier, the follow up. I've seen some non-existent follow up, which is in a lot of cases you might still have that same 10-to-1 ratio with the follow up. And
yeah, oh yeah, no, I mean,
every 10 people you don't follow up with, you lost another $1,000. So you could get, if they're worth $100, they might have been worth $100 twice, because you might have had a chance on the follow up.
If you put your PNCs in the system the right way, and then the ones that convert to clients, then when you need, it goes back to growing your firm, right? So when you need to go and shake the tree, you have everybody in the right place on the bus, on the software, that you can go back and tap them again and go, how was Christmas? Do we need to readjust the parenting time, right? Was the custody okay? Is anyone moving? Stuff like that.
How do you best identify what's missing at a law firm? When you talk about your discovery and your dollar process, how do you know what's missing besides the usual suspects? What's your process for that?
It takes a little while, but really, I mean, at the end of the day, it's what do they use foundationally to be able to run the business, right? Do they know their numbers? Could they do a back of the napkin P&L for their business? What have they done year over year? And if they've grown, I mean, as long as they're either flat or growing, you're going the right direction. If you're going down or you're losing money and it's what I call the tourniquet situation, then it just becomes leads and sales first, and it doesn't matter what else is going on in the background. But, in a typical situation, you come in and assess the software, you assess the cash flow, you assess the team, and then the quality of leads and conversions. And once you have that basic math down, you can figure out what the runway is to be able to grow the firm and implement.
What would you say are the key differences between what you do for law firms with regard to technology and operations and what other growth options typically do?
One is I chose not to be an agency because I feel like there's agencies that are very, very good, and there's agencies that are very, very bad. And if you lined up all the agencies next to each other at an event, most people don't know how to tell the difference. So I found an opportunity to be in the middle of the agencies and the SaaS products and the law firms where, with my background and what I've done in my experience, I can help apply the right technology, help them employ the right marketing agencies and grow their firm. As for what I do, we're more hands-on. We're smaller and we know where we're growing and how big we're going to get. We've seen it where other people have similar programs like what I do, or bigger coaching programs, where they're so big. It's I call it, they should all over the law firm. And I said should on purpose, meaning you should. The law firm can't implement all the shoulds. They need implementers. And that's where me and my team come in and we implement. And we help them grow. And what I like best about what I do is my obsolescence is built in. At a certain point, they don't need me anymore, and then we ask for referrals.
You talked a little bit about building the network and having the different networks, right? Personal, professional, financial. How important is the firm's ability to build their network in the grand scheme of things?
It's everything, because Google owns the internet. So you have to be in a defensible position in your marketplace. You have to be able to. Most people are like, I hate networking. Nobody blames them. Nobody wants to walk into a room full of strangers, as a kid or an adult and go, hi, can I be friends? Right. And the older you get, And the more senior you get, it becomes harder. But you got to have your sounding board and you got to have your trusted colleagues. To have a business that covers digital, but also covers, what they call it, like, minding your own backyard, the neighborhood marketing. People do business with people, right? And there's an old saying about trust and rapport, and it's not trust and rapport, right? It's competency and rapport equals trust. So, I call it the C's, right? It's the contact, the communication, the context, and the cadence. So you have to choose the contact, right? You have to create the communication. There has to be a context to that communication with a goal or a reason. And then how often do you have to touch those people to be able to stay top of mind? And that's really important because, at the end of the day, when Google changes their algorithm or what they're doing with LSAs where you can't challenge, a bad lead, you have to have other ways to go shake the tree. And, the bigger cases, for criminal, family, bankruptcy, any of them, real estate deals, you got to have that network. They're not gonna Google, best attorney near me or, top this or whatever. They're gonna go to their inside network and they're gonna ask their accountant and they're gonna ask their banker and they're gonna ask their wealth manager, their insurance person. Who do you know? And if you're not a known person in that network, then they get passed on to somebody else and it's not you, and you're constantly pushing more money into the crack machine that is pay-per-click or Facebook ads or etc.
Well, is there clear difference between the quality and the likelihood of a potential new client becoming a client when it comes from the network versus when it comes from, say, pay per click? It might
Yeah.
take 100 pay per click leads to make a client, where it might take 2 referrals to make a
Oh,
client.
most of my clients and everybody, even prior to working with law firms, referral closes at like 90%, and the tickets typically higher as well.
Well,
So it's
that's something I run into problems when people are trying to take the next step, the next level. They've maxed out the effectiveness of their personal or their professional network, so they're trying to test the waters in on Google or social media or digital advertising, and they're really really disappointed at the conversion rate of these new leads that cost way more than the free, you know, buy someone a drink or a coffee or a lunch kind of, you know, the way they've been doing business when they were smaller.
you hear it all the time. I'm so busy. I don't have time. I don't have time. You have to make time. You know, you ask anybody, and most business owners get to work between 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning. Coffee only takes 30 to 45 minutes. Breakfast only takes 30 to 45 minutes. And if you don't drink, that's fine. You don't have to drink to build connections. And the other part is be involved. So pick a charity. And people are like, well, how do I pick a charity? Two things. One is there has to be an altruistic component, right? You have to believe in the mission of the charity, but also go to the website and look at the board of directors and see if there's anybody that you've either heard of or they're in, a potential business that could refer you business or they could do business with you, or people that have connections. And eventually, you leads to being on a board seat. And when you become a board member on a charity, it leads you to, you're actually looked at as a leader in the community. You can use it as a tool for opening doors because, one of the most challenging um, parts of marketing in the legal industry is that there's that damn soliciting law that's in just about every state, right? So if you're volunteering or you're on a charitable board, you have a reason to call on all of your centers of influence, all of your best referral sources, under the name of, the charity.
Let's say somebody's watching or listening or whatever, and they're interested in maybe finding out what you can do for them. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
My website is www.lawofficesuccess.com. LinkedIn as well.
And they can talk to you about law firm management. They can talk to you
Any
about
of it.
scaling and
I'm
growing.
always happy to be a sounding board. If they want to talk to me and just vent, talk about one of my concepts, that's fine. I don't need to do every single discovery call to get a client. I'm happy just to learn and listen and see what someone else is doing that, maybe what I said, made them go, huh, that's interesting. And they want to bounce an idea off of me. Bring it. I'd love to hear about it.
All right. Well, this has been great, Allie. I'm glad that more people can hear and see and know what I already do know, and what a wonderful resource you can be.
Thank you.
I appreciate this. And to those listening and watching, or you, if you're going to grow, chances are strong that you're probably going to have to do something inappropriate.
And as we all know, if you're going to finish a virtual call with me, you have to throw in the virtual pound.
Oh, yes.